rhetoric by saying that the Third World War will be nuclear and that it will be destructive. And this is coming as Russia intensifies attacks on major cities in Ukraine at this very hour. Joining us now is Aleksandra Ustinova. She is a Ukrainian member of parliament, and we thank you very much for being with us. I wonder, do you think Vladimir Putin is real about this nuclear threat?
I don't know. Only Vladimir Putin knows what he's real about. And the one thing I can say, if he wants to do something, he's going to do that. Because Ukraine was a neutral country in 2014 when we were invaded. We didn't do anything to provoke him a week ago, and it's a total destruction. Our cities are being burned to ash, as you can see that. And that's just because he wanted to do it. And it's just a matter how far the West, the Europeans, the United States, the NATO would let him go.
When the West, when the U.S., when they hear Russia making these kinds of nuclear threats, it's very scary, right? This sort of, and Russia knows this. This harkens to the ramifications that the West is most afraid of. So what is your message to the U.S. and to the West knowing that?
So first of all, Vladimir Putin is a psycho, and we should be clear about that. And he will be going as far as we let him go, as the United States, NATO, the EU would let him go. He's a bully that keeps saying, I have arms, I have nuclear weapons, and I can do whatever I want to do. And he doesn't need a provocation for that. He basically believes he can do anything, and that's what he has been doing so far in the world. He invaded Georgia, and there was no response. He invaded partly Moldova, and there was no response. Look what he did in Syria. Look what he did in other countries. Right now, there is a public execution of Ukrainians in front of the whole world by Russian missiles, Russian airplanes, by the Russians. And we have been begging to protect our sky. We're not asking to fight for us. We're just asking for technical protection of the sky. We're asking for stronger sanctions. And unfortunately, even here, the world has to go into compromise, and they would put sanctions on Russia, but exclude the energy sector out of it. And that's what feeds Putin and his army. They would turn off SWIFT, but they turn SWIFT only for 7 banks out of 300 banks in Russia. Those are partial sanctions, and Putin understands that he can go as far as he wants, because even in the financial sector, there's no enough reaction.
Let's talk about the no-fly zone. That's something that you want. What do you say to American officials, Western officials say, hey, look, if you want us to enforce a no-fly zone, that is essentially asking us to go into military altercation potentially. What do you say to them about that?
I always ask him, where is the red line? How many deaths is? Or what do you need to see on TV to do that? Because so far we have more than 2,000 people killed. And to be honest, in the 90s, Ukraine was a nuclear country. We gave up our nuclear weapons, and we were promised by 3 countries, the United States, the United Kingdom, and Russia, that they will keep our sovereignty. And in case anything happens to Ukraine, we will have the protection. Now we hear the same about the NATO countries. I can tell you, the NATO countries are not so sure about, especially the Baltic countries, Poland, they're not sure they will have the protection, because we were promised the protection in the 90s when we gave up our nuclear weapons. And we don't have it. We're being executed in front of the whole world. So 24/7, you turn on the TV and you see Ukrainians die. Children die. He is bombing the hospitals. He's bombing orphanages, preschools with vacuum bombs. So after that, we keep asking. We had a promise, we had a treaty that we will have the protection. We are not asking American soldiers or German soldiers to come and protect us on the land. Give us the weapons to fight in the air, to protect the air. That's what the no-fly zone is about.
There seems to be something we're hearing a lot from Ukrainians, which is, and yes, Ukraine is not NATO. Ukraine is not in the EU.
We're an associated member.
But we've heard from Ukrainians saying they've made moves to become more democratic. The Ukrainian military has been trained, and clearly quite well, by Western forces as well. And they're being asked to take these steps towards democracy without some of the protections. How are you seeing that?
I think that if Ukraine loses right now, it means that democracy lost. We now have a coalition of about 90 countries who united to support Ukraine, mostly Western countries. If 90 countries in the world cannot do anything to one single bully, and if the tyranny wins and democracy loses, that means that there is something wrong with this world, with the world order, with the collective defense treaties. We have Russia sitting on the Security Council of the United Nations, telling the world what to do for security, the country that threatens everybody with nuclear weapons, and nobody does anything about it. So if now Ukraine loses, if Ukraine goes down, if it's totally burned to ash, because that's what he's going to do, and unfortunately, we don't even have a corridor to take people out of the occupied cities. We have children, we have women stuck there. If they live closer to the Polish border, they still have a chance to get out. Otherwise, if you live in the eastern part, in the central part, you're totally surrounded by Russian soldiers. You cannot get out. So this is a public execution of a whole nation in front of the whole world, and nobody can do anything. And he would keep going. He would go for other countries, because the world cannot even respond in strong sanctions, because you protect your own pockets. You don't want to pay extra for the gas or for the oil, and you don't want to put stronger sanctions on him. You don't want to shut down their banking system. You took 7 out of 300 banks, and you call this a reaction? We have thousands of people dying, civilians dying every day, and the world is still hesitating whether we should step in with the sanctions or whether we should give Ukraine weapons to protect the sky. Everybody has seen what Israel did. It's so-called the Iron Dome that they're using to shut down the missiles. We're asking for the same. We're asking to give us the protection for our sky. But unfortunately, we see the Western leaders being hesitant. They have been discussing for 3 days which banks, which out of 300 banks would be on the list, while we have people dying every day. I'm sorry, but this is cynical. And again, we had been in all international treaties. We gave up our weapons. It would be much easier for us if we had a nuclear weapon. I don't think Putin would be even threatening us. He might be threatening like he does with the United States, but he definitely wouldn't go after Ukraine. And now we are left alone.
Aleksandra Ustinova, thank you so much for being with us this morning and telling us what's on your mind. We really appreciate it. Nuclear